Get started?
Yeah.
I know, it's 7 o'clock, all right. Call to order at 7:01, we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thanks, everyone. Roll call of the board members, please.
Fudge.
Here.
Augustinelli.
Here.
Klein is not here at the moment. Robertson.
Here.
Yule.
Here.
Racine.
Here.
And Good.
Here.
All except Klein.
And he's absent and excused unless he happens to show up.
I haven't
delayed
heard from
because
him.
of bad weather.
Yeah, we expected he'd be here.
Okay.
I didn't hear
No, I
anything.
apologize. He was, he mentioned at the last meeting that.
Oh, it was at the
he
last
was out of
meeting.
town.
Okay.
Okay,
Sorry about that.
no worries.
Klein is absent and excused.
Excellent. So we have no public, so we can just skip past public comment and move on to review and approval of the agenda and any statements of conflicts of interest. And with the review and approval of the agenda, I will add that John spoke with me and he has an additional item for other business, item D, to just discuss training opportunities for, was for staff and for planning commissioners?
It's for planning commissioners, yes.
Planning commissioners, okay. So we would just, he has a brief presentation on some training opportunities that are available as item D under other business. Does anyone have anything else they'd like to add to the agenda? Or I suppose subtract?
I'll make a motion that we approve the agenda as presented.
Support. Motion by Augustinelli, support by Fudge. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Same. Motion passes. And we're on to review and approval of the minutes from January 8th, 2025.
Mr. Chair, I have one suggested change on that clarification in item 3, which was talking about our earlier minutes. When we were talking about the dog park, these minutes, the draft says add the word amplified, but I think we need to be clearer than that, like where's it supposed to go? And it was supposed to go between the words other and sound, because it's already in there one other place. So it's, we gotta be, I think, clear on where it goes, otherwise somebody makes traffic force down the road. Sure.
So we'll amend those minutes to indicate that the word amplified will occur between the words other and sound.
Yes.
All right. Any other comments on the minutes?
Make a motion minutes be accepted as revised.
Support.
Motion by Fudge, support by Robertson. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same. Motion passes. Thank you very much. And we are on to correspondence.
No correspondence.
We only get one of these?
Yes, I don't know. I think it mostly goes to the town board,
Okay.
and I think they just,
It says planning commission chair. I
yeah,
just
so
felt
that's,
That's
yes.
you.
singled
That's
out.
you.
To get a special magazine. Well, if anybody
We
would
get
like
them
to
in the
read it,
mail.
I
I
can bring it in
think
to
we
share.
get township closest in the mail.
How
Yeah.
many pages does that need to be? Is there a minimum number of words?
Depends how many sections you are.
Any other correspondence?
No.
No,
Okay. Then we'll move on to reports. Anything from the township board, Molly?
Oh, yeah.
Lay it on us.
The big discussion at the last township board meeting was the water situation. We've been trying to get the city of Traverse City and our people together and decide what we're going to do for water. And at this point, the city of Traverse City is not approving several projects that we've approved. So people are waiting and people can't move in, and I know there's a half dozen of them or so that are sitting out there. So the town board said, well, let's write them a letter. We have to find out if they can't provide water for us, we may need to do something else. And so whatever that is, if they don't have the capacity or if they're unwilling or whatever it is, but this has been going on for a year. We've got a couple years left on our contract with them, and if we have to come up with an alternative, it'll take a couple years. So it might take 3 years, and so we're trying to get an answer. It's also holding up now the commons. The Barnes area, which is in Garfield Township, needs to have water. Doesn't have enough water pressure for fire suppression and really to flush the toilet. So what the city is saying, and maybe true, I'm not an engineer, they need to loop into the commons proper where all the residences are. Well, that will add 600 new residences to our allotment of water, and they just want to use our infrastructure that we paid for. So it's a mess, and the community needs to start talking about that. Because we're, no reason to approve projects that can't happen.
So, do we have projects that are waiting to be developed because of this lack of water from the city, or do we have people who want to move into homes?
Both, is my understanding. We have, Grand Traverse Band has a project, and their houses are done, but they can't move in till the city says it's okay.
Yeah, so there's nothing wrong with the infrastructure itself. There's the ability to serve the water. It's just that as new projects come online, it's considered an expansion of the system. So the city has to sign off on all of those per agreement. So they're, at this point, are unwilling to sign off on those additional projects or connections to the system. So that those are all kind of on hold.
And if I understood from what I read and what you've just said, and I would add what I've read, is that there's, and this is not my area of expertise as a civil engineer, water capacity, but I do understand that there's a threshold for the amount of water that the city will sell to Garfield Township, and that there is a maximum amount of water that the city can fluctuate and draw. And it wasn't that somebody else's tap went dry in the city because we took too much water. It was just we exceeded this limit.
Yeah,
And
and it's a deal where I think they're claiming we exceeded it one day in the last 5 years, or I don't know what all that is,
I
but
read something similar.
I mean, it's, and they can't agree on how to measure how much we're
Read
using.
that as well, yeah.
And we've got Gordy Frazier. Jennifer Graham is one of the specialists in the area in that.
She is.
And it's like water going off a duck's back. They're not willing to get that communication going enough, so.
That's frustrating.
Well, it will make a big difference to a planning commission if you can't do anything,
Or to potential applicants, if they're seeing this play through and second guessing if they want to submit an application, if they are questioning whether they can get across the finish line at the very end.
And if we approve one, and they have a limit on time that they have to begin, well, if they can't begin, if it takes them 2 years to get a water permit, then we have to think about those things.
So there needs to be resolution in some fashion.
It strikes me that people should be more outraged by the fact that we have completed homes that people want to move into, and there's not a lack of water to serve them. It has to do with contractual arrangements for the use of the water.
Well, everybody's trying to figure out what the game is.
It's
And
frustrating.
We don't like being played, so,
Well, good luck.
yeah. That's it.
Any planning commissioners, zoning board of appeals?
Yes, we had a meeting last week. The guy returned who wanted to build 6 inches into the, or 6 foot into the 10-foot setback, but he forgot to show up, so we denied it. It was the second time he knew it wasn't gonna make it, so he just stayed home.
Parks and Recreation hasn't met yet this year. We meet next month. Joint Planning Commission?
We meet next Wednesday.
Okay. What does staff have to report?
Nothing at this time.
Everything's in the other agenda items.
Okay. Well, we'll advance through the agenda. We have no unfinished business to discuss, so we'll move on to new business and start with item A, PD 2025-5, 2024 Planning Commission Annual Report.
Steve's going to cover this. He was the one who prepared the 2024 annual report.
All right, thank you, John. This rather than a staff report, we have the actual annual report. Most planning commissioners are familiar. I'll inform especially our new planning commissioner. According to the Michigan Planning and Enabling Act, planning commission shall make an annual written report to the legislative body, in this, our case, the Township Board, covering all the different planning activities, all the different actions, items discussed by the planning commission. So it kind of actually covers planning commission's agendas and then things we've worked on in the planning department as well. We go over, like, as planning commission is one board and commission that staff interacts with, probably the most, but others that we liaison between, some within the township and some with some regional entities like Traverse Transportation Coordinating Initiative, TTCI, the regional airport authorities, zoning board, some as like alternate representation. We go through our number of reports. We did 114 total planning department reports, most of which were in your packets last year. An overview of planning commission's role, the strategic plan, the master plan. That was probably the biggest single project, was wrapping up the master plan. Most of the studying had taken place in 2023, but the plan was adopted in July of 2024. And then the plan commission every year does an annual work plan. We will probably focus on this more in February or March. Where we actually did like the annual priorities. Last year we did not do that specifically because we were wrapping up the master plan and then adopting a new one. So when we take a look at those more specifically, we can align those with the updated goals and objectives of the master plan. One thing that we've started using the planning, zoning and engineering module within BSNA software, which primarily like our building and assessing departments and treasury use. But they also collect all fees through that system. So we're actually able to track that. And it's the first time it's been in this report, tracking the number of applications and the fees. So we, between administrative and ones that came to the planning commission, we reviewed 31 total applications, and the fees generated 14,700. So this will be good to track year over year and kind of just have a baseline of how much activity in terms of reviews, and it's something we can use to compare with how much staff time and planning commissioner time is that does that take, and if we need to adjust the fee schedule at any point, we can kind of use that as data to take a look at that. So we go into detail. I'm not going to read through everything specifically, but there were quite a few site plans that were reviewed administratively. These were by right reviews. So if you've seen activity around town and it's something that didn't come to planning commission, chances are it was an administrative review. Sometimes it's by right. Sometimes it's an amendment to something that's already there. there were quite a few of those, and then summarizing everything that Planning Commission reviewed last year, all the conceptual reviews, all the development reviews. You had the one rezoning that wrapped up, a conditional rezoning that wrapped up, some text amendments, and items that you went through at the study session. One I'll actually comment on, there has been the new state legislative session has started. I don't know if anything has been reintroduced that we were looking at last year that didn't make it, but we'll keep monitoring if anything like a short-term rental bill comes up again, which chances are high. So we'll see if and when that comes again. But otherwise, that's, oh, and then the items at the joint planning commission between John and what had been Joe and what will be Molly going forward, items that they had been reviewing. So otherwise, that's a summary of planning activities for 2024.
John?
It looks fine to me, Steve. And I think you already answered what I was going to ask. On page 2, you talked about the annual work plan, and
Yes.
sounds like probably next month or the month after, at a
Yeah.
study session, we'll start looking. You guys will lead us to certain topics that are way more than we can bite off, and then we prioritize what do we want to do when. Okay, good. I
Yeah.
remember looking at some of the previous ones, we'd have something that looks a little like what's in the master plan,
Yeah.
but it also had a column for timelines, and
Yeah, so we kind of need to do
shouldn't let
that,
ourselves off the hook on that.
chunk that for this year, which could be either next month. Next month, which is also an agenda item to amend our schedule to do a joint meeting, and I think the board's already discussed that. It might actually be a good time if there is something the board would like the planning commission to work on, or between a collaborative discussion if there's something, but we can also firm that up in March at your study session as well. So there will be opportunity to do that.
Great.
Otherwise,
There are no
yeah.
additional comments, questions, or concerns. There's a recommended motion at the end of the document, page 9 and 9, if anybody would like to make that.
I'll make the motion that the 2024 Planning Commission annual report as provided in the Planning Department Report 2025-5 be approved and forwarded to the Township Board.
Support.
Motion by Robertson, support by Agostinelli. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same. Motion passes.
Thank you.
And with that, we move on to item B, PD 2025-6, zoning ordinance amendments on substantial construction definitions, signs, and lighting discussion.
So this is an opportunity to kind of continue some of the discussions we had previously back in the October study session. First off is the substantial construction definition, and there's at least 4 locations where the term is provided for in the zoning ordinance, but we do not have an actual definition. So this discussion focuses on, at least in those locations where we have the definition for the term. The term could also be applied as part of conditions and so forth as decisions are made, whether it's the Planning Commission or the Township Board related to developments. The first part is in section 423 where it talks about special use permits. We have where it talks about period of effect. So if a SUP is approved, it allows for that to go forward within 2 years unless substantial construction is not commenced within 2 years. Then it basically is no longer effect, and unless it gets an extension. So that there's a provision for extension, and that there's requirements and criteria that's considered that should there be a 1-year extension from that point of time. But talking about necessarily that what does that substantial construction involve? We've been kind of interpreting it a little bit different in each cases that we've looked at, so this would provide some consistency across the board. The other part is it's termed in a site plan, so this would be either a site diagram, administrative site plan, or in the case there are some site development plans that come in front of the planning commission, these would be things like planned shopping center or commercial highway districts. In that case, they're only valid for 12 months. And at this time, I don't believe there is a provision to extend that. So that's a separate item, but there isn't any provision in that if that were to be extended. And then the other part is planned developments, which is similar to the special use permits in terms of the 2 years. There's also provisions to allow that to be extended for 1 additional year, similar to the SUPs. So of the definitions we provided, I think about 5 or 6 definitions last time. Based on some of the discussions, we kind of honed in on one, edited it slightly. I think it's pretty straightforward in terms of what it means. There was, some of the definitions talked about, financial, how much money's been invested. I think we also, when we do any type of regulation, we also want to look at the enforcement ability to that. So this allows us to physically go to a site, verify that we can see stuff is happening. They may have spent, money and on the project. For us to track that requires us to receive documentation to determine, we have to sift through that. So we think that the physical inspection of the site, and that's what this is really referring to, is that the site work must progress beyond grading and completion of structural foundations, and construction must be occurring above grade to be considered substantial work. So they have to be going essentially vertical. So that's one that we're kind of looking at right now, and just want to kind of get maybe your thought and feedback on that.
Molly?
So will our building department, under you get a permit to do the work and the building department goes out and checks it, will they, from this definition, be able to determine those things? Or is this something that we're going to have the zoning administrator look at? Or who's going to,
This will be through the zoning administrator.
through the zoning
Yeah,
administrator?
so the building department would be completely separate, because that would be under the state code that they're referring to, and this would be in the zoning ordinance, so this would be the zoning administrator for those issues of, whether it's still that permitted or approval is still in effect.
Don't want to see a conflict between Carl telling them they're all set to go and Mike telling them they're not,
Well, I think in the case of the building permit, they're already been, probably most likely granted that building permit.
But they go in and inspect.
Right,
They inspect the footings, they inspect the grading, they inspect
right,
all of these things. So,
right. So I think at this point, when that work is being done, it's at this point where they need to at least, potentially consider, let's say they're not at that point, or they could apply for an extension. But this would be at least what they would have to be done under the zoning ordinance.
so it'd be Mike's call.
Yes.
That's kind of a related question. So is there interplay between building and zoning? So how do these projects that are approaching expiration generally rise to the top and sort of get on a list? So what would be the process for identifying, oh, well, this one's getting close and hasn't made substantial progress? Is it that we know there's not been any inspections from the trades? Like, how do you develop the list of what's coming up?
Well, we keep a track of what has been approved, and there's not a lot. I mean, there's, maybe half dozen or so that we will watch. We usually figure out, okay, what is that deadline? In the case of like the special use permit or planned development, it's at the recording of the report and decision order. That is when the clock starts ticking. in most cases, they're moving forward at a normal pace, and this doesn't become an issue. But we do have some that get approved, and for whatever reason, they haven't commenced.
Fox Run?
Yeah. Or even just like one that I know that was done last year, last spring, was at 3066 North Garfield, which was the small apartment building next to the car wash. So they've now coming up, well, I think it's May is when that first anniversary is. So we kind of follow up with them and say, look, just to give you a heads up, you're now, the clock is still going and you got time here. Now, they can always come back if for whatever reason it does expire, they can reapply as well. They always have that option to do that. But we're trying to ideally get this moving forward. I think what happens in a lot of cases is, as much as they might complain that they have to come through the planning commission for approvals and so forth, that actually this process is the one that's probably the easiest for them to do in a lot of the projects that we see. So this is something that they often get early on in the process. Okay, we've got this. It's also helpful to know that they've secured approval from the township to move forward. But there's all these other issues related to whether it's getting materials or financial backing or whatever is, maybe it's been altered or whatever. Those things tend to delay. Or sometimes we've seen that, I know of just one case that comes to mind, is where they just want to have that option and to know that they could go and build this and not necessarily are going to pursue it right now. But we usually track these and usually kind of alert them well in advance so that they're aware of that this is, these approvals that they got are not guaranteed that they're going to be there forever, so.
So if this water dilemma that we're talking about, created, made some kind of something so they couldn't get their permits and start, would that be a loophole that we would look at on a case-by-case basis, and they would be allowed to have more time?
That's a really good question. I can think of one right off the bat, that the Village at Garfield, which is an apartment complex on Garfield near Hammond Road, right kind of behind the gas station there, that we approved. It hasn't started yet. Now, part of that was because they were going for MISTA bonding on that project, and that takes some time. But that's one that's potentially could be impacted by this, because now they would be able to get a one-year extension, but even that may not be enough.
But
So-
if that water problem happens, or if that situation takes more than a year, and their funding would, if they heard anything about it, the funding, they would probably postpone the funding or something till the water problem got solved, and they
Right.
wouldn't be able to start till the water problem was solved, and that would be beyond their control.
Right.
I
I mean, the one-year extension is probably not that big of a deal. I mean, it just gives us an opportunity to revisit, make sure that they're still on track. But that one-year renewal or extension might not even be enough. I mean, so I think that's something that maybe we look at.
John and Steve, to your guys' knowledge, is it common that a single period of extension is offered? Or are there other communities where applicants can come back and get, recognizing the concern that you just brought up, and I would add to that, what if there's just a huge downturn in the economy and there's a project that, we would still like to see developed, but there are intervening conditions because ultimately what we're trying to prevent is somebody who is going out and moving a shovel of dirt once a month to say that they're making progress for a period of, 5 to 10 years. I mean, if somebody doesn't get it done, then you want some other developer to come in and build the housing or whatever it is that our community needs. But if there are intervening reasons why, I'm thinking of like 2007, when, there was the huge market crash and all kinds of projects were disrupted. What does a township do if you've got projects that you've approved and that it took quite a while for recovery to occur, and if we've got to take all these approved special use permits and whatnot and throw them out the window because the rigidity of our ordinance says we have to, does that serve the public good? John?
We did that, John, didn't we?
Well, I think historically, we've been pretty liberal about granting a one-year extension, but I would caution us against thinking just in terms of the applicant and, oh, the poor applicant can't get it done in 2 years or 3 years, so let's give them more time. All of these approvals that we do are based on our review of objective criteria, including what are the conditions on the ground at the time we made the approval. What's going on around there. And a project that might be appropriate in 2025, if they came to us, if they came with the same request in 2029, we might not like the project for various reasons. So I don't think we'd want to willy-nilly just start liberalizing how easy it is to get extensions, because that might be not good for the rest of the township.
Well, and what criteria would you use to say you get an extension and you don't?
Well, there's got to be objective criteria, but by recollection, I can't quote in Bible and verse, but they're right in the ordinance.
Yeah, we do.
There are criteria.
For the one-year extension, there's about 5 or 6 points of criteria to apply to it.
Okay.
I think more recently, we received quite a few of those because of the pandemic and the ability to get projects moving forward. So that was, kind of used a lot. But yeah, I would agree with John that if a project is approved, sometimes conditions change at that location or that area. And if it really hasn't changed, I don't think there's anything wrong with having to go through that process again.
Yeah.
If it's substantially the same, something really hasn't changed in that area, it should be fairly much pretty easy to go through. But there may be something that changed in that area that now we consider differently that would probably be appropriate. And I think that's the reason why they have the limitations of the period of effect to begin with, is because we wouldn't want to approve something and it sit there for 10 years and all of a sudden it's conflicting with something else that might have built nearby or whatever.
Not only changes on the ground, but has there been any changes to the ordinance? Has there been changes to the master plan, which we just adopted a new master plan? So anything before that would be good to potentially review against. Does it still meet the new updated master plan?
But the loophole is that if an applicant demonstrates progress, I mean, that's what's going on with Fox Run right now, right? They're demonstrating, I don't know, maybe Fox Run doesn't apply. I've lost track.
Well, that's been the problem why we don't have, the problem is we don't have a definition.
Because there hasn't been one.
Because there hasn't been a definition, and they've already been kind of identified as already having substantial construction because there's utilities that have been installed on site, even though they haven't been connected.
But under this definition, they don't have anything above the ground. They're not going
Right,
vertical.
so going forward for other projects, this would apply. So I think it's important that we have some definition in here which we can measure and determine, because I think it would eliminate that interpretation that is kind of maybe different depending on the project.
So I understand the intent of what we're trying to achieve. I'm concerned about how the definition of substantial construction inserts into each one of these statements. In that substantial construction, if you take the definition of substantial construction and insert it into the word substantial construction, the definition of substantial construction is site work must progress beyond grading and commenced under a period of effect. Proceed, and under expiration of approval, it says has not commenced. And then under scope of approval, it says has not commenced. So we've got a number of specific achievements that are then modified by has not commenced. And my concern is that we're intending to set benchmarks, and then where we insert those benchmarks, we're saying you have to commence those benchmarks. So there's a disconnect in a way that I think exposes a wily developer could come in and say, well, I've started the process to get towards vertical, so I've commenced substantial construction. John, you're
I
an
see what you're
attorney, what are your
saying.
thoughts?
I'm not really following that concern, Chris. Maybe I'm missing something, but I think what John's proposing is we simply give a definition to a term that's found in various places of the ordinance.
I understand that, but what I'm saying is when you take that definition and insert it, it says substantial construction has not commenced.
If you change the word commenced to occurred, does that fix the problem?
I think it would. Or at least, I haven't thought about it. I guess I'm concerned even that maybe an attorney, somebody with better command of legal language needs to maybe take a look at it and say, you know, we need to say, this is what we're hoping to achieve, and this is the wording that we've suggested, and make sure that, in fact, that's somewhat ironclad and can't be reinterpreted.
Well, one thing we could do is, and this is what I was thinking that we would do based on the expiration and the ability to have an extension, is we have site plans, special use permits, and basically plan developments, PUDs or PURDs. They all have similar language. If we were to reformat the whole ordinance, we'd probably dump all this stuff into one area, and they would all reference that. But they're kind of broken out in 423, 424, and 425. We can adjust the language, first of all, so that there's some consistency. I'd also like to be able to do that, like I mentioned, and site plans, for whatever reason, doesn't allow an extension, and I think there could be an extension on a site plan. I wouldn't, not necessarily, that's something we can have a different discussion on. But I think we can go back and maybe assure that the language here is tweaked a little bit so it's consistent across each one. And when we're doing that, we can look at that, make sure there's no misinterpretation or somebody trying to take advantage of it. I think most are aware. I think in cases, most projects start in a timely manner. It's just a few that may have some issues related to delays and that type of thing.
I think your concern, Chris, about some wily attorney trying to figure out a way around it is a good concern to have, because there are going to be such wily attorneys out there. And I don't know that we'll ever come up with a definition that somebody can't try to do something like that to it. But the wiser we are in constructing our definition in the first place, the better the chances are it'll withstand that kind of scrutiny. But I don't know that I've got any personal suggestions about how you want to tweak it. I think it looks okay, but not bulletproof, for sure.
I think if you're trying to avoid modifying 423, 424, and 425 directly, perhaps even commencement of substantial construction means. Because your point is, did it start or did it actually happen, right? And so the word commencement is what is giving you pause. So without changing the wording within those, you could make commencement of substantial construction mean what that new definition written in italics is, potentially. It's just wordsmithing.
Construction. I think that might be workable, actually.
We weren't intending to amend those areas. We were just going to have the definition inserted, but we can go through and we can propose some language there. And if anything, we can make it consistent across those four areas.
Just a note.
Molly?
Is there, if our intention here is to make sure that they have met this substantial construction terminology, maybe we should say that the standard has not been met. If the standard has not been met, then we know it's not completed. It didn't meet the standard. The standard is that, no, when you're thinking about it. That's just a thought.
Okay.
We can come back with some language and we'll draft and kind of move with that. I guess the bigger question is, does the kind of the draft definition of substantial construction is. Do you think that's something that is workable? Any tweaks to that, changes?
In terms of substance of what
Yeah.
we're trying to get at with substantial construction.
Folks?
Well, I'm
Yeah.
happy with it.
I like all the language in it. I don't, this last part where it says, it describes what it is, and then it said to be considered substantial work. Do we want to use work there? Or something else? You can, it is what it
Well,
means,
the last
but
word in the definition.
it
I
seems
should-
odd.
Yeah, that shouldn't actually, I would say, I would almost say to eliminate the last, where it says, must be occurring above grade and put period.
Yeah.
And delete the last. And what we might do is we might think about, sometimes we try to illustrate that as examples of what that might be. Like, for instance, people were talking about walls up or whatever. I think we might kind of indicate or illustrate what that is, so that it allows the zoning administrator to, when they interpret that, to say, yes, okay, this is what was meant by construction occurring above grade. So we can look at that and maybe throw some examples. We do that in other definitions, just to give illustration to what that might mean.
Do you have any concern that somebody's going to get cutesy with that and put up one tiny little piece of something above the ground and try to claim that's construction above grade? And I don't know where you could draw lines or how you could draw lines, but it just seems like if somebody wants to be imaginative and stick it to us, there may be ways they can try to do that. And I don't know if we can outsmart them in advance or not. But
I think it's like any project. I think they can go along, and at some point, the whole project could fail. That does happen. I know one of the things that East Bay Township is dealing with, if you look at the corner of Town Line Road and South Airport Road, you see the foundations, and actually there was water main put in there and so forth. There was supposed to be an apartment complex going in there, and it stalled. That's where I typically see, for whatever reason, I'm not sure why projects happen this way. It's like you get the underground done, you'll see the foundations put in, the footings, some of the utilities might be done, but then that part about going vertical, it seems to be a critical juncture in the process. And sometimes you do see some of them even start to go vertical and they still stall for whatever reason. So I don't think there's any way that we can totally protect ourselves, but I know they're looking at that because of that project in particular that's been sitting there for about 5 years now.
Been that long?
So it's, so what, they're looking at ways of performance guarantees and that type of thing. And I'm like, what would you be able to put into place that would assure that how you deal with a site that falls apart like that? I don't know. So I think as much as we try to put these in place, there's always the possibility of a project moving along and then all of a sudden stall for whatever reason. I think what helps us is that we're in a market where there's demand for, and the cost that typically if somebody's going forward, you don't see too many of these kind of stalled projects. So I think we're fortunate in that regard.
I guess my last thought, and I know I'm repeating myself from our last discussion, I'm curious actually about, and I guess I don't know how the East Bay plays into this question, but my concern is, what if you have somebody who is proceeding diligently to the best of their ability as a developer to meet these requirements, and they don't? What do we do as a township or as a planning commission if our rules say, nope, sorry, you don't have a wall up, your permit is revoked. Stop your project now.
You can apply for an extension.
But
They could reapply. I
Extension
think they
could be
might be
gone.
able to reapply, so that it's not that it's the approval that's no longer valid, so they would probably have to go through the review process.
So you have a half-constructed development, and, or not half even, and I guess my thought, Molly, actually, to your thought was, the 1-year extension's already been
Used up.
used up.
Done.
In this
Yeah.
scenario.
And so, and I guess how does this even apply to multi-phase projects? Does each, what
It's
if you
the
built-
project as a whole. So if they just did the first phase, that's all that matters. So for instance, like we were talking about the Housing Commission project, that's just phase one, so we consider that it has started.
right,
But if the scenario that you talked about, if, it's not that the, let's say, special use permit is revoked, which is a little bit different, it's just that it's expired. So I think what we would probably, and we'd have to maybe take a look at this in the ordinance, but I anticipate that it was approved, they could come back and get a new, they would have to go through the approval
we
process again.
go through the approval process.
Yeah, it's-
But in the meantime, they'd have a stop work order.
Yes, because they wouldn't have a valid permit. So
Mm-hmm.
it would cause a pause in the project, but maybe that's not necessarily a bad thing, given our project. It might be an opportunity for the township to weigh in on an unfinished project.
I'm having a hard time being sympathetic to the stop work order. I mean, 3 years went by and they didn't do what they were supposed to do, so they're not hardly getting punished by having to start the process over to get approval. And they saw it coming. It's not like staff's played gotcha and sends them a notice the day after their permit expires. They were giving them information month after month, and
And it really only applies to, if you have a five-phase project, once you've got phase 1 done, all bets are off. You don't have to have all 5 phases done in 5 years.
Correct.
Correct.
I mean, we have that, I mean, that's what we're looking at, like Copper Ridge PUD or Chelsea Park. Those projects were started 20-plus years ago, and so as long as they were, I know Chelsea Park, they, for the longest time, only had that one part that was actually done, but that's what started. And you don't have the control or the ability through zoning to deal with the pacing of a project and how it's built or financed and all of that. Those are really beyond, all we're doing is trying to ensure that the use that was approved is started in some form enough to allow for that to continue.
Yeah, and as you can tell, I mean, I keep thinking both sides of it. On the one hand, we've got developers who don't do anything, or stick a shovel in the ground, or do a little bit, and don't achieve what they're supposed to. On the other hand, I'm worried about the township being exposed to somebody making substantial project, on a large project. But, yeah, it's, my thought is that I think that the changes you're talking about, I think this is good progress on the discussion about the change in the ordinance. And I'm, for one, am comfortable with you guys, working through the revisions and bringing it back to us. What does everybody else think?
Yep.
I just wanted to bring up the one about the site plans, whether it's administrative site plans approved by staff or site development plans approved by the planning commission. We have an extension on there where it basically says an extension of time can be granted in writing by the approval authority on the basis that the owner applicant maintains a good faith intention to proceed with construction. So there, it's just, that's out of the ordinance. That has no reference to anything other than, okay, they start, well, we're good, it's 12 months is up, and they haven't done anything. They're like, if they show
Sorry, what portion was that applicable to?
Bottom paragraph.
site plans, so whether it's an administrative site plan or a site development plan done by the planning commission. It basically, in the ordinance, it's at the very bottom of the, page 1 of the report, and then it's, it's also at the attachment, if you were to look, I had these highlighted, but it's on the second attachment under K on page 4-31. If you go down, it says expiration of approval, K2. We thought we should align that with the same criteria that we have, or something similar to what we have for the other ones,
Makes sense.
so that we're consistent across, oh, there it is. How come that was highlighted, but this is not?
That's a good question.
I was upset because in their packets, in the paper copies, you don't have the highlights.
The digital, actually, this is straight off the website, yeah.
Right, and that's
My
what I did.
digital one.
Yes, okay, so that, I could have been able to point to the orange highlight. So that's something that we would like to do in terms of just making some consistency across there so that there's some criteria, because maintaining good faith intention, I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
I can't measure that, I don't.
No, you can't.
Aligning this with the other language so they're all consistent seems to make some amount of sense, yeah.
I don't want to get into a full reformatting of the ordinance by any means, but I thought that one would be good to add in there. So we'll come back and with some language for these.
Okay. Do you want to move on to lighting?
Yes. So we talked a little bit informally about lighting. I just wanted to, we went through section 517 in the ordinance, which is essentially our component in the lighting, that deals with lighting. Based on some projects recently, mainly the Seven Brew, the coffee shops that had the outdoor accent lighting is something that we wanted to address in the ordinance. We also wanted to talk about, in the case of the U-Haul, where we had indoor lighting that essentially functions as outdoor lighting. So those are some of the things that got us thinking. So we went through, and we, in the report, these are just subject areas that we want to look at. We'll come back with more details, but we just want to kind of, and maybe there's some other things that you want to address, but the first part, it says accessibility, but it's not the accessibility section, it's the applicability section. And that should be something to address indoor illuminated devices and non-conforming lighting to some extent. So it talks about outdoor, we also want to talk about indoor lighting that essentially functions like outdoor lighting. Prohibition, this is one of the things that in our ordinance right now prohibits neon lighting, and this is one I want to know, what do you think about? But would we also include the building accent lighting similar to what the coffee shop has with that LED lighting out there? The reason I thought about it as a potential prohibition is it's really hard to, once that lighting is established, particularly with LED lighting now, it can be adjusted very easily. So we might come by and say, well, you need to dim it down. Part of it is like, how do we know? We don't know where it's set at. We don't have access to their control panels for the lighting. They dim it down, and then 2 months later, it goes back up to its brightness. So one thought is to just outright prohibit it, is one possibility. Now, the neon lighting is something that's is prohibited, but it's something that is really, it can still be used for signs and so forth, but it's for the accent. So I believe it's how it's registered in there.
John, is there a distinction between, like a definition that would distinguish between architectural accent lighting, which we could prohibit, like lighting that is intended to be a feature versus lighting that is intended to light space or light an object?
I think we could come to that.
'Cause
And I think that's what we were trying to
Need
do.
the
Yeah.
definition.
Yeah, we would have to have a definition.
Yeah,
And actually, now that I'm reading it there up on the screen there, the following types of light fixtures shall be exempt from the provisions. We exempt neon lighting, and I'm not sure we want to necessarily exempt it. I don't think neon lighting is really used much these days, if at all. It's all been replaced essentially by LED lighting. But I think the intent is that you have this bare bulb type of lighting out there. Now, it could still be there as part of some type of sign element, and I think that would be addressed under the, the sign ordinance, but other ways of lighting. But that's something that we can look at and how that would be defined, if it is, under an overhang or whatever, and it's providing light.
Because the LEDs are often like brighter than what the neon lights used to be. It's like becoming more of an issue as we've seen them accent more and more buildings, or sometimes you see it right around the window as like a really bright LED light that just highlights the window, but just draws more attention to the site.
Chris?
Molly?
So, but with Seven Brew, their lighting is their identity, isn't it? I mean, that's what they use on their buildings.
We looked at a lot of Seven Brews, and yeah, they pretty much all have
That's
that.
their,
Mhm.
you know.
I think at
so
the very
how do we-
beginning, they had, it was bright enough that like someone mentioned to staff they could see it above, like from Garfield
yeah.
Road.
Yeah.
But
You
is
see
there a
like a-
way to measure that it was?
Yeah. Other than to include it on a photometric plan or,
Well, and that's the thing, it wasn't even identified initially on the plan that we were aware of. So it was one of those things that was just added in there. But that's, like I said, one of the parts we try to do is when we put in some type of requirement, how do we enforce that? And that's where I just, at least for a conversation here, suggested that, because one of the things, if it's not permitted, it's not permitted. And it's not to say that we don't necessarily like it, but the ability to manage that, like if it is very bright, really becomes kind of an enforcement nightmare.
Isn't there a little gun, like, the speed thing that stick outside the window and know how fast somebody's going by, that you can put up there and it'll tell you how bright that is?
Yeah,
If it's below a 10, you're.
Well, we always, I know what you're talking about, and the problem we have with that is we have to figure out if we ever go to court over something. So, do you need to have somebody that has the proper
Expertise.
training to do that and so forth? So that's where we're,
Well, we would get a photometric plan for space lighting, downlighting.
correct.
The distinction, and again, let me back up, Molly, because I was thinking of it in terms of prohibition of this architectural lighting like Seven Brew has, but
What if it's their,
what if it's their brand, and then you're looking for a way to consider it for approval or regulate it?
well, yeah, I mean, do we have the right to tell them you can't do it the way you,
It wouldn't apply to them, but it would apply to future buildings. So they would be grandfathered in essentially.
there's likely to be somebody else come in.
yeah, if
that's-
someone else came in.
Well, and they're not the only one to do this. There's other buildings that we see out there that do have the lighting, the trim lighting and that type of thing. So this would be, it's not to say, I'm thinking of one that has similar something like this is like Burger King. They don't have it as LED where it's kind of ribboned around the building. It's actually recessed and encased, but it is a lighted band that goes around the building. It's not as bright because it doesn't have that intensity like the LEDs, but it essentially is decorative accent building lighting, kind of does the same thing, kind of like it draws your attention to that particular building.
John?
I would like to hope that eventually we can figure out a way to not allow that kind of identity. We can allow applicants signage, and that's how people find them. But if we want people to be able to drive down the road, and if I'm not looking for a restaurant or a coffee shop, my eye shouldn't instantly be drawn, like they're trying to do, to make me look at that building. I don't want to look at that building, and I don't want the guy behind me or the guy in front of me looking at that building if they're not going there. I want them to go straight. So it seems to me that they can do their branding however they want as long as it doesn't cross some lines. We give them a sign, and that's how they do their branding, and that's how they advertise for their consumers. But I think they're getting cute with some of these lights. It's an extra way. Oh, that must be a seven roof 5 miles away. I
Yes.
see the blue light from here.
Yeah.
That's baloney.
And
Or the
that's what they
Burger King
do.
thing. I wasn't thinking of
Yeah.
that. Same thing. People can find a Burger King if they want it. They don't need to have a red light going around the building.
And it's
So I don't
counter
feel-
to our dark sky standards.
Well,
right?
that's one of the things we're really trying to get at, I think, is that this is decorative lighting, and it does, goes against what the principles of this lighting section in terms of the dark sky elements. And we do know that brands do adjust. McDonald's, you've seen them in all different types of locations. They're not all the same. It's not, they try to portray that they're similar, but they adjust depending on wherever they'll be in certain resort communities where there's all kinds of architectural standards. They're still able to go there, they adjust it and fit in. So certainly at this point, it's just for discussion. We would certainly look at, the legal ramifications of this is something we can do and so forth. And maybe we would do a little bit more surveying around the township and see what existing situations we have already, just so we have an understanding of the context of this. But it's, like I said, I think from our standpoint, the best way to deal with it is either you permit it, and if you permit it, knowing that it's going to be an enforcement issue, or if we prohibit it, then it's very clear in the ordinance that it's not permitted.
So you would be looking for some direction from us today, perhaps, that says, explore further how you might go about permitting and conducting a review of such lighting, or explore further defining the ordinance to prohibit such lighting.
Well, I can look at both. But yeah, just giving some feedback and direction, what your preference is.
There more feedback regarding those two directions that folks have?
Well, I like using the dark sky ordinance. If there's a way to apply that to some of these other issues, if that's a goal that we have, and it is, then all these other things fit under that. So if this doesn't meet our dark sky, it's not really just lighting, decorative lighting on the outside of your building. It doesn't meet our dark sky, you can't have it.
Yeah, it's emitting light upwards,
Up.
not up and out, and that's not just downward, so.
At least we'll have something to stand
It's,
on.
the reason I bring it up is it's an area where it's not well defined in our ordinance, so that's why we would like to have it. Whether it's permitted or not, it needs to be in there, it needs to be explicit, however it's addressed.
Is Jerry Dobeck still around as a resource for dark sky stuff?
Yeah.
He was very instrumental 30 years ago when that ordinance got written, and he might very well, if he's still around and available, maybe he may have studied what other places around the country are doing dark sky wise to deal with these sorts of things if they negatively impact the dark sky.
Yeah, I've had communication with him recently, so I know he's around. So, the other one that I guess we'll investigate and see what some of more of the options are, so we understand. The other one we mentioned is kind of the indoor lighting that creates light trespass or glare. And there are actually quite a few ordinances that I was looking at that address this in a way that, you have to identify trespass. It's basically light that's cast beyond the boundary of the lot on which the lighting installation is sited. So we would have to add some definitions in here. There's a couple different ways that can be addressed, but this is not an unusual requirement or issue. And so we can work on that.
So what about the light emanating from the living room window of a house? That's not something we're trying to do anything about, I don't think. You'd have to make sure any definitions about what light trespass is or whatever doesn't conflict with that, or that's an exception. But I don't know how you draw the line, but.
Right. Well, and I think, again, it gets back to that we want to make sure it's something that we can enforce and measure and ability to enforce.
Yeah.
So we'll look at it some more, but I think there's something, feel pretty confident we can address. It's a little, the kind of ambient light that you get from just naturally, I look across and I see, yes, their home over there, I can see their living room lights on, is a lot different than some of the light situations that we're talking about, where it's, it's, and that comes,
Commercial grade.
yeah, that's where it comes back. There's these definitions of what light trespass is, can be, more definitive. Same thing with glare, what does that involve? We already have a definition, we might look at, upgrading that definition as well. So some of
So-
those things are really important.
So I think what I'm hearing you're saying is that there may be some samples that have been applied elsewhere that would treat, for lack of a better example, the interior lighting in the U-Haul and the number of lumens and the glare and the trespass that light may have. It would treat that interior lighting in perhaps a similar way that we treat exterior downlight.
Correct.
That sounds like a good approach to me.
Yeah, we're not the only ones dealing with that, I can tell you that right now.
While we're on the lighting issue, how do we address people who have motion lights on the outside of their house, that those lights are shining into the next door neighbor's yard? Can we address that, or is that, when the neighbor walks down the sidewalk,
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking of a specific incident, but the neighbor walks down the sidewalk and the guy next door's lights come on and actually have a voice that comes out and says, you're under surveillance.
They're walking on the sidewalk?
When they walk to their house, to the front door to their house, the neighbor has a light that is triggered and says, you're under surveillance.
This happens every time they take their garbage out, or
Every time they walk to their front door in the night,
their own front door.
the neighbor who doesn't have the lights.
When they walk to their front door, oh, that's nuts. Wow.
I don't know if there's a way for us to enforce, those lights need to stay
Wouldn't have to be shielded.
in your yard,
Yeah,
not the next door neighbor
Yeah.
yard.
there might be more than just ordinance issues going on in that
That's a bad
scenario.
Oh, yeah, but the township, Mike's
Yeah.
been dealing with it for a long time.
Yeah, that would be,
Yeah, and our ordinances does not really address anything of that.
yeah.
I mean, it's not,
Is that something we want to protect our people with, or no?
I mean, I think we can look at it and see, maybe if other communities, how they may have approached it. I'll be honest with you, our ordinance is actually fairly good in terms of lighting ordinance. The most lighting sections in zoning ordinances that I was looking at were a lot more thin than what we have. Now, there's some things we can beef up, but I'm not sure, we are typically, when we're looking at it, is applying it to non-residential areas, commercial, industrial, et cetera. So, but we can look at that. I mean, we do reference, decorative lighting for Christmas and other things like that. So we are addressing it from that standpoint. So it is maybe something we'll look at.
If we can.
One of the things we want to make sure is that we require lighting plans. It says that in our checklist or in the ordinance where it says we can require lighting plans, so we get an idea where the lights are, the intensity of the lights, and particularly when they're meeting the illumination level requirements that we have in the ordinance. I think we just need to have something in there that which has specifically calls out that we can require lighting plans for developments that require site plan review, and then we can actually list what typically, like, for instance, we like to get cutoff sheets with the fixtures, so we have descriptions, so we can see what the color temperature is that they're putting in those fixtures, all those types of things. But it would be helpful for us, helpful for the applicants to say, okay, a lighting plan is required, and they go, well, what's that? And we go, okay, here's a lighting plan definition and the content of what that constitutes. They're pretty simple and straightforward. There's, for the most part, are not really difficult. And it seems like the use of them and the ease of having those generated is becoming a lot easier than it was, before.
Okay.
One, outdoor recreational facilities. One of the things that I'll mention we have a ski hill in the township, and lighting there is a little different. And we thought maybe there's some way that we can address unique lighting configurations for outdoor recreational facilities. In that particular case, I'm talking about like Hickory Hills, where the ski slopes are open in the evenings. Also, they previously had expressed to us that even after the skiing, they still may have some of the lights on. I haven't been out there to witness it for the purposes of when they're making snow and that type of thing. So they may need to have those on for safety or whatnot. We thought probably it should be addressed somehow, because right now we do allow for some of that already in our ordinance, but for recreational facilities. But we thought to give some flexibility, it might tie it to allowing the planning commission to adjust lighting requirements pursuant to a special use permit. So that way, and this would just be strictly outdoor recreational facilities. It's not all outdoor lighting or anything, but just to allow, because it might be difficult for us to deal with these. I'm not anticipating that we're going to have too many other situations like this. But for those ones, it's almost, how do we really deal with it while we still keep intact some of the standards and requirements that we want to maintain in our lighting section. So we thought maybe it would give best to have, if the planning commission were able to do that as part of that special use permit review. So.
I follow the logic of that, and I think I concur with it, but how does just addressing it and dealing with a special use permit solve the problem like at Hickory Hills? They've already got their special use permit.
Right. So if there's any changes or anything to that lighting, they would have to adjust it. If there's any changes to that development out there, if they do an expansion, they're going to have to come back,
Revise the
amend the
special use
special
permit.
use permit. Right now, it says basically they have until 11 PM. But it does say unless otherwise, let's see. That's on the time thing. I'm also thinking about the type of lighting as well might be an issue. So if it's within a special use permit, there's some flexibility afforded to the planning commission on that. And should that permit ever change, it has to come back. It may be an administrative review, or it may be coming back to the planning commission. So they would then have to come in conformance with that. We thought it should have a little bit better handle on that, those types of situations than we currently do.
Are there any other than the Hickory Hills, are there any other developments that this would be relevant to?
Not offhand at this time. I mean, the other types of uses potentially are like a baseball park or soccer field or something like that. I think what's the unique aspect to the ski hill is that you're dealing with the topography, and also where some of those, it's the angle of the lighting as well, because they're trying to project out as much as possible. And so how do we deal with that, and are there ways to potentially shield that or whatever, mitigate some of that impact by still affording them the benefit of that lighting?
My thought is it's something significant. There's a lot of lighting issues that maybe are more important than that one in particular to address. But
Okay.
certainly was one that could be addressed as you guys have time.
Okay. Well, as we're going through this section, it would be something probably referenced in there. So it's not a big deal for us to, most likely what I'll come back with, section 517 isn't that long. We'll probably just almost have it as like a rewrite might be better. and just like remove and replace it with the new language, so we can tweak any little thing in there. A couple other things, right now, the maximum height of any pole for pole-mounted lighting is whatever the height of that district is. Some cases, you could get some fairly tall poles. So I think in our, for instance, like our planned shopping center district, I think that's one of our tallest districts. I want to say it's 40 or 50 feet tall. We thought it would be more appropriate to align it than the buildings on the site or something of that nature, so that unless otherwise permitted through special use permit. Might be something that we look at as opposed to the maximum height in the district. Just a thought. The rest are pretty minor items, but we felt would help. We thought diagrams on some of these things, such as a diagram for full cutoff lighting, which we require, definitions for some of the terms, updating it in terms of format tables, that type of thing. Just makes it easier to, our staff to interpret and also to illustrate to people that are looking at our ordinance if they have a better understanding of it. So these were just some of the areas that we thought we could kind of cover and come back with you with some alternatives, some ideas, options.
Anyone have any more thoughts for John and Steve on lighting?
No, sir.
And it looks like signs, the attorney hasn't conducted the review yet?
Hasn't completed it. They do have the information.
In their.
It's in their court right now,
All
so.
right. Well, I suppose we look forward to hearing what they have to say.
I guess that's all we have, at least on the zoning changes.
Thank you. So from there, there's a PD 2025-7 Housing TIF Potential Policies discussion.
So this is something that's a little bit different, but I thought it would be helpful to have some input and at least some feedback from the Planning Commission, because we deal with housing developments in the township. But I'll kind of just summarize this, but historically, the state of Michigan has had a Brownfield Redevelopment Financing Act that's been used for brownfield redevelopment throughout the whole state. It's actually one of the more successful programs in the country, and the ability to really get reinvestment into some of our urban areas. And it's, over the years, since it was first done in the late 90s, it's been altered to, brownfields are typically contaminated sites that have some liability to it. They now include historical sites, sites that may be obsolete, functionally obsolete, so they might not be contaminated, but it might just be a building that's no longer really practical for any contemporary uses. There's different ways that it's applied, and one of the things that the legislature did recently was apply it for housing development. So this kind of almost turns it completely different. And I think the reason they did is because they found successful in the use of tax increment financing, site-specific to a project, as a good way to have some type of subsidy for a particular project to get it done. And I think that's why it was appealing to the legislature to now apply this to housing. The township, Garfield Township, has done a lot of pilots, payment in lieu of taxes projects, and those are typically for more of lower income residents in Garfield. I think there's roughly about 15 projects that the town board has approved over the years. This would be an opportunity to really focus at a different range of income. So where those pilot projects are typically people earning 60% of the median income or less, this now kind of moves it up more the middle range, which is really kind of a gap that we see in a need for housing. And so it allows us to be at what we're kind of calling the 80 to 120% of the median income. And I provided a chart in there just for your reference, but the bottom line is this is now has the ability to support projects that might otherwise not be built. And just as we've seen a really kind of a downturn in terms of single-family homes being built in the township, there are actually potentially some challenges for even building multiple family housing. So one of the projects you're going to see coming here, we're expecting it in the next month or so, is the Gauthier project, which you saw a conceptual review last year. It's that property kind of over there by Cracker Barrel where they're planning to put in roughly about 150 multifamily dwelling units. That did receive a brownfield HTIF, housing TIF approval from the town board. It also had to go to the county to get that approval since the county has the brownfield authority. But that project is going to be in front of you for a special use permit application. And so before there's another one, the township wants to develop some type of policy. Where do we determine that these incentives are going to apply? And that's where I thought maybe if the township is going to be using this tool, and I could see this has already gotten a lot of attention and application throughout the state. There's a lot of interest by communities to use this as a way to support some housing. Its ability for essentially the township to become a partner to these projects by providing that incentive. And most of these projects have a place, and that's where I think the Planning Commission kind of comes in terms of if these areas are going to be, let's say, incentivized by the community, what factors should we be considering in terms of the criteria that they have to meet in order to be considered? It's not something necessarily binding, but I think it helps to give some direction. Also, just doesn't open the door and say, yes, anybody can apply, and then we'll kind of evaluate them as they come in, but at least kind of gives some outward-facing indication to applicants, developers that say this is what is the priority, and you're more likely to be successful in Garfield Township if you do this. So I put in here just, and this is just for illustration, but some criteria. There's 5 bullet points at the bottom of the page. I just kind of want to get your thought on these. If we were to incentivize housing, now, and one of the things I should point out, this is probably going to be mostly multifamily housing. However, it doesn't prevent it from being applied to single-family homes. The only problem with single-family homes, so home ownership as opposed to renter situations, that portion, the way it's applied for home ownership is a little bit, hasn't really, I don't think, been fully vetted and figured out. It's easier to do it for apartments because you have typically an apartment owner that has leases with people that can track things such as income and that type of thing. With the single-family homes, it's a little bit more complicated because people own the house outright. But nonetheless, it could be a potential. I know the town board has talked about the need to have starter homes in our community, and this potentially could be a tool applied to that as an incentive. But these bullet items talked about areas.
John, Molly, I think Molly had something to add.
Just a clarification here. We're not talking about one house. We're talking about a subdivision that might have these smaller homes in it.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's where I think it wouldn't be the one-off homeowner coming. This would be more developments. Where I could see it potentially applying is, let's say we have a PUD, maybe there are some condos, and maybe there's some single-family homes, and maybe a portion of those single-family homes could be, starter homes that are subsidized through this process. So you get a good mix. But that's where I was, definitely would be subdivisions.
And that's where they're using it in other communities, is you've got some Class A, Class B, Class C, and Class D, and you have to have a certain percentage of Class D, and however you do it, but divide it up so that you do get a mix. You don't have enclaves of a little low income here and that, like that.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. I think it creates for a better community when we have some diversity in that form. Areas I mentioned served by water and sewer, starter homes, and generally we're, thinking starter homes are smaller lots, 12,000 square feet, the home might be 1,200 square foot home. We're thinking of focusing on areas where there's a future land use designation, either mixed use center, mixed use neighborhood, or high density residential, or even moderate density residential. The interesting thing in this is that there's the ability for the township to include some public improvements. So one of the projects, if you recall, that we approved a while back was the Marengo apartment buildings that are to be located, actually the project started, it's behind Baymont in kind of next to Applebee's in the back there. So they did not have a trail connecting back to the Miller Creek Park. Potentially, we could have included, if they were to do an HTIF plan, is have some type of public improvement or some, an improvement such as a trail, boardwalk, or whatever, could be incorporated into that, and that incentive is funded through this particular program. And then the last one is just that we thought, for instance, the Gauthier project was one that just kind of came to us cold. I don't think the township board or anybody was really kind of ready to go through that process. But one of the things I think that I encouraged to have happen was at least have the conceptual review in front of the planning commission, because now they're going to have to come through the special use permit process, and we at least want to make sure that the use is permitted and generally considered to be appropriate in that location. So they're still going to have to go through that special use permit process, meet all the requirements of the zoning ordinance, get approval by the planning commission, and et cetera.
What made that site a brownfield?
Well, only that they're putting housing on there.
Well, there's no contaminants there or anything?
Not necessarily. There may be, but the way that's what I'm saying, it's like almost, to do this, all you need to do is be constructing housing. Even though the term is, they're using this, it's really not, it doesn't have to have anything to do with the environmental conditions of the site. So it's
That's
kind
what
of,
that state law updated in 2023. According to state definition, you can now count anything as with housing that applies to this for a brownfield.
I think what the appealing part about it was that the process of doing brownfields was very successful in using the tax increment financing mechanism to do this, that they wanted to mimic that. I don't know why they just didn't create a separate TIF act, but they just kind of roped it in, and now you got MISHTAs involved in it and everything. I guess because it can all mix in together.
Molly?
Generally, this is used for infrastructure, though, not for the building of the buildings, correct? I mean, that's my understanding is, I could be wrong on that, but that this brownfield is for water and sewer to come in, those kinds of things, not for
No,
bricks and mortar.
No, you're right. Historically, brownfield has only been, when it comes to like public infrastructure, but no, this actually is for the construction of it.
Oh,
So there's, for instance, on that Gauthier project, there was a gap of about $10 million. So this program, through this mechanism, will fill that gap to make it work, that they otherwise wouldn't. So it's the total cost of the project. So
Good for
it
that
is, it's
builder.
complete game changer to it.
yeah.
So what is the respective role of the township and of MISHTA as to whether one of these things gets approval?
So, first of all, it has to go through the community's brownfield redevelopment authority, which we rely on the counties. The counties is the umbrella organization. So that's the intake portion, so they are responsible for the entire county, and if somebody applies, they apply to the brownfield redevelopment authority. From there, it has to go to the county board for approval before it goes to the state. But before it even goes to the county board, it also has to get concurrence by the township. So locally, it needs to get township approval, brownfield redevelopment authority approval, and county approval. Once it hits those, then it goes to the state of Michigan. In this case, it would be MISTA that would weigh in on it. Now, potentially, historically, it's been Eagle, that has been the department that has been looking at it for the environmental aspect, so there could potentially be some of that rolled in there as well. But once the state approves it, then there's the ability to proceed with that project. So local approval first, and then to the state.
My first thought is it's gonna take forever. I mean, wasn't Mishta the holdup at the Beta housing project? It took, I mean, Beta got all its financing, and they were ready to rock and roll way before the Housing Commission, and it wasn't through any fault of the Housing Commission. They just were at the
They had to
mercy of
go
Mishta.
through at least 2 rounds.
Right, so that,
Yeah, so I wonder how viable this tool's gonna be. It sounds pretty attractive on paper, but I'm wondering if in reality,
Well,
if it's
I-
gotta go through Lansing,
I
It's
know
a-
they do use it extensively.
Right,
in
so it's a-
southern Michigan and for
yeah,
big developments even, as long as they have a housing component.
the source of the funding is completely different. So in the case of the Beta project with the Housing Commission, that was using HUD dollars, CDBG dollars that came to the state, then the state disperses those. So those are federal dollars. These are generated by the project. So TIF is basically saying, before the project starts, everybody who's getting the tax dollars on that site continue. But now with the increase of the value of that project, that increase in value, the taxes on that are collected and go back into the particular project. So if you don't have the project, you don't have the dollars. And really, a big player in this is the state of Michigan because of the school tax dollars that are collected on your property. The property taxes you pay, a big chunk of them are school taxes. What the state does is it keeps the schools whole, and it's MISTA's role is to participate into this project and provide the funding for the project. And I don't know how they fill their gap, but once that TIF plan is completed, then the new, the plan goes away, and then the taxes are all adjusted to that. And it's a completely reimbursable situation, so the costs that are incurred by the developer on the front end, and then they have to make application to the Brownfield Authority to get reimbursed based on those collected taxes. So it's kind of and that's why it's been really successful with the Brownfield, and I think that's why they wanted to say, hey, why don't we apply this to the housing? So it's utilizing local and state tax dollars to help support the project.
And it may not be forever.
No,
It'll be 5 years or 20 years or whatever it is, and then the taxes will come full.
yes. So the maximum is 30 years. Typically, a brownfield plan, or in this case, HTIF plan, would only to be whatever the gap is needed. So you're right, it could be 5 years, could be 7 years, could be 10 years. That would all have to be determined on using, the financial data and information. So I think it has a great potential to at least help with some of the housing. It's another tool in the toolbox, as they say.
I would like to see the township lean into the ownership possibility. I think that homeownership does a couple of things. It gives people deeper roots here, and also it helps them build equity and wealth. I think those are important for a thriving community. So I know you said that that's the more challenging of the scenarios, but it seems like something that as a township we could really lean into. I haven't memorized all of the zoning district lot sizes and setbacks. 10,000 square feet for a lot seems like we could do smaller than that even, because that's where your economies of scale are going to be, where you have density in appropriate places. So that's kind of my thought, is it seems like a neat idea to encourage some home ownership and get, younger families or retirees who want to stay here and be invested in the community.
Or do you think townhome type ownership would be?
I think that would be a real possibility in the right place with the right look. Absolutely.
John?
I'd like to echo that thought, and I don't know, I don't know much about the so-called tiny homes, but every now and then you read about them nationally. They seem to be a NIMBY topic, that nobody wants them anywhere near where you are. But echoing Kara's thoughts, that might be a good way to get some people to get started. Or senior citizens, maybe they can downsize into something that they don't need all that land and they don't need all that size dwelling. So we might want to not have minimum sizes talked about in here. And I don't know that, maybe it's a terrible idea and it's dead on arrival, but I don't think we've ever really, we sort of said, someday we got to talk about tiny homes, but we've never had that conversation. So I don't know where it's going to go.
Well, I think, yeah, and these are kind of just some illustrations that we can tweak into something, but certainly I think the application of the, using well, we could use the PURD, which is just a mix of residential units, would probably be one that would work really well, so we could really flex on those dimensional standards and really allow for the creativity of a developer to come in with a good mix. In talking with the director of the County Brownfield Authority, she's going to be looking in, I said, I'll tell you right now that Garfield Township would be very interested in that home ownership option. I know some ways that they've done that is working in other parts of the state, to some extent, not as prevalent as multifamily, but for the single family, is using something like a land trust or other mechanism to monitor that project. But it's something I think would make great sense for our township. I agree.
Well,
We kind of have that. Traditions subdivision off Rush Road started out. Now, I think they had to equalize the density, so like a cluster type development, but we wouldn't have to have it that way if we had smaller lot sizes. But they started out with some very small houses, 900, 1,000 square feet, no garage, very basic kinds of places. And then they have big houses and other things in the same area. So it's not brand new for us to
Right.
have it like that.
Yep. That's true. I mean, certainly it comes down to what, the kind of creativity of developers and the ability to
Yeah.
apply this program to it. It has great potential.
does this give you some good direction to advance the development of a policy?
Absolutely.
Any final thoughts from anyone?
I just wanted to mention, piggybacking on the mention of the lot area, the mention of 10,000 to 12,000 is a reference actually to our own zoning ordinance. For the R1 district, the minimum lot area for a single-family home with public sewer, or for minimum lot area with public sewer, is 15,000 square feet. In R2, for a single family, it's 12,000, and in R3, it's 10,000. So it's smaller lot single family is, according to our current ordinance, referring to single families in R2 or R3. So if we want to use that as a potential tool, that could be something we could look at as well. Or, as John was alluding to, the PURD is in there as well.
You could do many more than 4 houses per acre. 10,000 square feet,
Mm-hmm.
quarter, right? 42,560.
Right, roughly a quarter acre lot, a little bit
So
less. Yeah.
you could do more than 4. I mean,
Mhm.
if you have water and sewer.
Right, the infrastructure allows for that. Our current zoning might need to be adjusted
We might
to
need to
accommodate
look at
that.
those.
So that might be where that leads us to at some point in the future. Alluding to the next
Yeah, this is
topic
a
of
great
conversation.
segue.
Great
into our next
segue.
subject.
Yes.
Thank you for the discussion and feedback.
So with that, we'll move on from new business to public comment, and we have no public to comment. And next is other business, which is a zoning atlas.
So, segueing from that conversation, this is in reference to everybody get the Michigan Planner magazine. The entire magazine this time is about the Michigan Zoning Atlas, and this is kind of taking the conversation we just had and going to the 30,000-foot view of that conversation. So the first time I saw something about a zoning atlas, it was from Connecticut. It was in a conference a couple years ago. But the idea was to take like some high level. This is focused on housing specifically, but to take high level data about zoning in all the different communities that have their own zoning ordinances, and to kind of compile that into an atlas. It's also part of a movement. There's a movement to do a national zoning atlas, which as a GIS and map nerd, I absolutely love this kind of stuff. I'm curious on some of the tools and how they are putting it together, but Michigan is working on that between the Michigan Association of Planning, some of the housing groups like Housing North and Housing Next. There's a few others, kind of some of the universities as well, kind of supporting this effort. There is a website, mizoningatlas.org, that kind of explains it in a little more detail. There's a webinar they put together. But the Grand Rapids region, so Muskegon, Kent, and Ottawa counties started with a pilot of it, which I'll show. But Grand Traverse County happens to be the next one. Networks Northwest is working on it. I forgot to email them ahead of this to get any additional details, but something that we want to, as staff, be plugged into that effort, and if they need data from us to help supply that. But it kind of explains why do this, and I think it's almost easier to just show it. So this is the interactive zoning atlas they're building. You can highlight over some of the different communities, the different zoning districts, what jurisdiction you're looking at. This happens in the rural areas. You're going to have a lot of agricultural land. You have closer into Grand Rapids, you have different types of districts, and you can zoom in and probably see more fine-grained what they look like. Obviously, a downtown city is going to look a lot different than the region. But seeing the region here is kind of an interesting exercise, because what this tool has on it, it has a bunch of the different types of districts, primarily residential, mixed with residential, non-residential, or some places that may not have zoning. And you can change the base map, so you show the topography or you show the underlying aerial imagery, some other kind of key things. But the cool thing about this is this filter. So one of the options is you see kind of the high-level zoning, but then you have these filters. Show me where people can build single-family homes. So you toggle that on, and it takes a second to load. But all of those areas is where you can build single-family homes. Single-family homes on small lots. This is where it shows where the rules allow a single housing unit, whether detached or semi-detached or attached, which would be like your townhomes, on less than a quarter acres. We were just talking about quarter acres. So where could you do single-family homes on small lots? It shrinks to there. Missing middle housing, which is your duplex, triplex, quadplex by right, would be allowed there. Apartments, anything with 4 or more units is there. Accessory dwelling units, we talked a couple times about accessory dwelling units, is there. And housing without parking, where there's no parking mandate, happens to be there. And you can kind of reset this, and there's some advanced filters as well. You can look at one family. Is it allowed? Is there a minimum parking requirement? Is there a maximum height? Is there a minimum lot size? Say I want one that has quarter acre minimum, or like large lot, or if I want the opposite of that, or different options. So you can kind of play around with a bunch of these. Is a planned residential development allowed? So some communities allow that. So the interesting thing about this is being able to toggle is on and off and just kind of see visually again, the way this is coming together and the organizations putting it together are looking at it from a kind of regional and broader perspective. And with the Traverse City area kind of being next to pilot this, we'll see kind of how we fit in and compared to the region overall. Now, what will that ultimately lead us to? I don't know. This, when I look at this, I see, yes, it's very interesting to see zoning from a regional perspective, and especially to understand the implications of zoning from a regional perspective. However, zoning is still decided at a local and individual jurisdictional level. But they talk about like how our region needs more housing, and a bunch of regions, they need more housing. Where does it make sense to put that? Garfield has some kind of unique pressures because we're closer into the core city. We have water and sewer infrastructure, notwithstanding any contractual difficulties, but we have access to the water and sewer. So it's just sort of a way to kind of understand like how are those challenges going to be, like what are the opportunities, what are the challenges going to be, and just to look at that at a broad level. And from a GIS perspective, I look at this and see, well, they're applying it to housing. If we can figure out how to use that. I don't know if this is an Esri product, our main vendor, and for a lot of municipal applications is Esri's ArcGIS. I don't know if this is that or something else, but they have this similar, if they have a similar thing to do filters like this, in theory, we could do the entire zoning ordinance this way. Show me where we can build, or show me where this is allowed. And if we ever want to do amendments or look at, kind of analyze our own zoning ordinance, it'd be quite a valuable tool to take a look at. So,
Great. I look forward to more information as the pilot study for Traverse City becomes available, and you can show it to us. Molly?
yes.
Well, it's a great tool for the consumer. As a realtor, people come to me and say, where can I build multifamily? Where can I, what's the density in Blair Township or Green Lake Township or whatever? If that was in one place where they could look at that, it would be helpful to the realtors, but it helps the public. Where can I have a one-off 1 acre lot?
Yeah.
Not everybody does that, so.
Which is most of what the, like, where can I build single-family homes, and it's most of the region. It's probably a lot of that in the agricultural areas, and this, is going to be your one-off 1 acre lot. I'm actually curious on the advanced filter. Show me minimum lot size of 1 acre. Can I do it? Apparently I can't do it. So but that would be interesting to see that, like, where can I do 1 acre versus anything less than 1 acre. It'd probably shrink pretty quickly after that.
But it needs to be regional, I think. I mean, Benzie, we're into Benzie, we're definitely into Leelanau, Grand Traverse. I don't see so much Kalkaska, but it's going that way.
I think one of the challenges to these types of projects is they're great projects. It's great when you get all the data together and it's
Yeah.
all up to date and it's accurate. It's maintenance of them that
Maintaining
are
it.
challenges, maintaining it. Particularly, I mean, we want to participate because we want to make sure the information for Garfield Township is accurate and it's
Yeah.
available to people to use. But somebody's got to kind of coordinate all of that ultimately, so to keep it ongoing is going to be important. But I do think, like we've seen in other areas, it has the ability to, not just for the consumer or somebody looking to build, but does have a way to analyze the state and see it in a different lens before, and potentially address some of these things more on a regional basis or even statewide basis through different policy approaches to things. So, good information.
Very cool.
Yeah.
John?
I was just going to comment, I think it also can serve as a real eye-opener for policymakers and people like us, the planners, and stuff in Kent. And I realize it's regional, but
Yeah.
the finding just sort of screams at you that the most expensive kind of housing is the only kind you can legally build on 80% of the land. I mean, something's wrong with this picture, and we didn't know it.
And then
Not
they
if
all
that's what
scream
they-
because there's no
Now,
workforce
I don't know what the
housing.
answer is, but we got a problem if that's the sort of finding that we have up here. Now we got to start figuring out what are we going to do about it, but.
Which gets to some of the things we were just talking about. It's like, yeah, we just mentioned, like, we want to see opportunities for ownership. Larger lot, single family is going to be the most expensive, so smaller
Exactly.
lot might
Exactly.
be the middle thing you need to have an ownership opportunity, but not the kind of cost, and that applies to not just cost to the consumer, but the cost of infrastructure to serve all of that. The housing organization's example in here kind of really walks through, and it has a certain kind of advocacy bent to it, but it walks through the example pretty thoroughly on, like, here's the high level look at what the implications of doing it this way would be versus kind of an alternative way based on the infrastructure, based on median income of their area versus what you could actually build and who could afford the things that you could build. And the other thing is, like, it shows how, like, land, like, especially like larger lot, single family, like it is making that argument. I would tend to agree that it does take up a lot more, like, land space. Like, we've talked about a lot how, like, we've got a lot more multifamily in Garfield especially. I'm looking at, though, the master plan, our existing land use map when we were figuring out how is all the land kind of presently used, regardless of what's it zoned or what the future land use was. Single-family residential is about 25% of the land, and ag was about another 19%, which may include some single-family homes on it. Multifamily was about 3%, and mobile home was about 2%. Mobile home would include Kings Court. So about 5% of the land has about the densest development, and probably a decent percentage of the population versus 25% single family. So kind of just putting that into perspective. Like, yeah, I think seeing this from this perspective, it could be just an information kind of, eye opener. But, yeah.
Polly?
But in the discussion of trying to keep prices down for housing and some kind of workforce housing that are single family and all those things, if you sell an acre lot for $20,000 does not mean that you get a quarter acre lot for $4,000 or $5,000. It's not happening.
Right.
That quarter acre is going to be $20,000 or, you know, whatever. So it's not, the land,
Right.
we need to think about the use of the land.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we don't have, it doesn't go forever.
Right.
But the price, the land, if you've got multifamily or you've got anything else, that land is worth a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't equate to break it down the other way.
Right. Right. And that's probably going to be a challenge for Garfield, just the land cost being so high.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It would be interesting to kind of crosswalk. So I'm looking here about the median income and sort of thinking about what you said about density and affordability, sort of crosswalking, what does our housing stock look like and where are the biggest mismatches? And then how, as a planning commission, can we address that? And of course, some of it's regional because we've got people coming in from outside the county to work and maybe vice versa. But I just think about how do we match what we build and grow to the community that is trying to live here.
Mm-hmm.
Needs.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Ready to move on?
Yep.
Great. I look forward to seeing this evolve.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. We'll keep
So
you informed.
Next issue on the agenda for other business is review of officers, and I gather from the documents we received that we may have a technicality.
Yeah, so the Planning Enabling Act, this is something that kind of came to light after the meeting. There's a provision for what an ex officio member is. So actually, in our case, Molly is our ex officio member by the state law. She's the one, as a representative from the town board, that's on here as appointment. So in
So I should
the,
not vote?
no, you can vote. It's
be
the
This-
office position, so
I
if you
can't be an
scroll down.
officer.
With full voting rights,
No, you
yeah.
got full voting rights. If you
Yep.
scroll down, it's the next, section 17. The planning commission shall elect a chairperson and/or secretary from its members and create and fill other offices. An ex officio member of the planning commission is not eligible to serve as as a chairperson. So then, further down in our bylaws, basically the purpose of the vice chairperson is to fill in for the chairperson in the event of an absence.
But I-
So that's why we were just wondering, I don't know if it would be appropriate for you to be,
Fine, Pat's
Vice
not
Chair.
here, let's just stick him in there.
He's going to get voluntold.
I don't think it's not like there's planning cops out there or anything like that, but we just, for the sake of transparency.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah, so I just think
Got
we just,
enough to do.
yeah.
I was just curious, though, I think it's a gray area.
I mean, technically, we don't, by law, we're not required to have a vice chair, but our
It's a
Our
good
bylaws
idea.
and I believe our planning commission ordinance has that position created.
Right.
Is serve as chairperson different from act in capacity of the chairperson?
I would be, if I was serving as the chair.
Well, but as the vice chair, you could act in the capacity of the chairperson, but does that constitute serving as the chairperson in the full-time role, or just a substitute for, a meeting? I mean, I think it's technicality. I'm perfectly happy to have you remain the vice chairperson, but
I'm just kind of
Rather
throwing out, I
not
don't know what
fight
you guys
City
think.
Hall on it, and
Yeah,
that's what's in the ordinances.
Well, yeah.
Or if that's what's in the bylaws, then we can make a change. We've got plenty of board members
My concern
here.
is that if she's being the chairman and we do something and end up in a fight, we're gonna lose because
Yeah,
she wasn't supposed to be the officer.
Somebody else could be a chair, a vice
what
chair.
did you say earlier about wily attorneys?
You started with that adjective.
She was presiding over that meeting and she couldn't do it. We don't want that.
I have one thought. I hadn't thought about this till I looked at the materials, but we can't do anything about the statute that the legislature came up with, but we could always suggest and eventually, hopefully, accomplish an amendment to the bylaws. Those are ours, and the section you've got highlighted, the first sentence is, "The vice chairperson shall act in the capacity of the chairperson in his or her absence." What if we just stopped there and eliminated the next sentence that talks about, in the event the chairperson becomes vacant, then the vice chair shall succeed at his office? That's where you're going to run afoul of the statute.
Right, because that's where they actually succeed to the office if Chris resigned or died or something.
So if we just took that one sentence out,
Filling me up?
Okay, but think
We're trying to
about it.
prepare for
We can,
possibilities.
I just got this job.
There's a story here, buddy.
If I was presiding at a meeting, vice chair moving into the chairman's spot, and we passed a bunch of stuff through, or we did not pass something.
Right,
it was more
right.
likely.
Mhm.
And then those wily attorneys come in and say, well, she shouldn't have been serving as the chairperson running the discussion on that. So let's not put ourselves in hot water for any reason. We've got people who can serve, and so whatever you guys decide.
And Chris is here most of the time, so,
Chris
I'm going
is
to-
here
There might
most
be-
of the time, but
but there may
Still.
be occasion or two that, but I think, quite honestly, if I would recommend just maybe considering another vice chair, at least for the
Yeah,
time being. just for, I mean, sometimes it's appearances and so forth, which
I
are really
think-
important. And we always try to be transparent and always in
We
accordance
need
with
to
our.
make this an agenda item then?
If you elect a new vice chair, or
Yeah, we can
if
put it on
someone
the
wants
next
to-
agenda. That might be appropriate.
Someone
Pat
wants
will
to,
be back here at that time.
Maybe if people have interest in doing it, they contact you guys, or,
How about we mess with Pat and tell him we,
He won, yeah.
he was voluntold for the position.
It's always dangerous to miss a meeting.
so you'll
Get
put
elected.
you'll put it on our next agenda then to,
Yes.
okay, very
Ele-
good.
Election of vice chair will be on the next agenda.
that would be a surprise for him, wouldn't it?
Yeah, we'll see if he reads the packet or not.
Is there a requirement that a member of the planning commission has to be a town board member?
We always have had, but, I don't know.
Well, I know we've historically always done that, but, I mean, just thinking out loud, what if you got appointed by the supervisor, not because you were on the town board, but just because you're you? Then you're not,
We didn't include all of the Planning Enabling Act.
but I don't know whether that's an issue or not.
I guess I'm not following you, like if,
If she wasn't appointed because she's,
appointed just as a citizen at large.
yeah, then she's not an
Yeah.
ex officio.
But I think, I
I
think,
have a
Right here,
role.
actually.
I have a role as a liaison back to the town board, so.
yeah, in any other.
In any other township, one member of the legislative body must be appointed to the planning commission as an ex officio
Okay,
member.
I'll
Yep,
add it. That's there, all right.
yep,
Forget that idea.
yep.
All right.
Okay.
Well, next on the agenda, looks like we need to amend the planning commission meeting schedule, or consider amending it. I assume there's a request from the Township Board of Trustees to do a different date for that joint meeting.
It's the same date, we just wanted to identify the change in time.
The one that-
Typically-
Move it up to 6
6
PM.
o'clock, I see.
Mhm.
So, since you already approved the meeting schedule, we decided just this edited tweak to it should also be approved by the
Six, no
planning
problem.
commission.
Do we need to pass a motion for that change?
I'll make a motion that we change the February 26th meeting to be at 6 o'clock PM instead of 7.
Support.
Motion by Augustinelli, support by Robinson. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same. Motion passes. And finally, you wanted to talk about training opportunities.
Yeah, one thing we've really, I'll be honest with you, we haven't done a really good job is providing, I mean, you are members of the Michigan Association of Planning. We thought we would like to bring some more opportunities for training right to your study session. That's partly the reason why you have this meeting dedicated every month, is to have some discussions and on different things. And it's not just about zoning changes, but also opportunity to kind of learn about trends, obviously learning about the zoning atlas, other things of that nature. There is training opportunities from the Michigan Association of Planning. We thought a couple of options here that just kind of want to discuss informally here. They have a lot of programs that you can go in person to see. We know that's really difficult because everybody has, things that they're doing, day jobs, all that type of thing. So they also provide on-site training, so we could have somebody come here and present. They also have some recorded trainings. One of the ones that's done a lot is called Planning and Zoning Essentials. It's essentially a basic training. I think it's really good, even for those that are seasoned planning commissioners. It's a good refresher sometimes, and it's also good to kind of get that going through some of the statutes and so forth, and the roles and responsibilities of the planning commission. They do have a version of it. It's a 4-hour program, but it's recorded. So what I was thinking of doing is maybe we could split that up over a couple of meetings. So 1 month at your study session, do one part, or potentially maybe it's over three months or something like that. I think 4 hours is a lot to take in one evening. But we could see, I could contact MAP to see if we could maybe break that out a little bit more. The other option too that they do have is They typically host it at different venues. They don't have anything, I don't recall seeing anything close to us coming in the next couple of months, but they do have a online version via Zoom that's going to be on Wednesday, March 19th from 6 to 8 p.m. and then Thursday, March 20th, so the following day, also from 6 to 8 p.m. So if anybody's interested in doing that, let us know, and we can register. You have a budget for education, so we have the ability to sign you up for that. And I think the recording option might be good. If we can take a look at it, I can talk to MAP about it. There's one workshop we thought would be good for on-site. So what on-site involves, we basically get a quote from them. It's a cost where they will have an instructor come here. They would be in this room. They would do a presentation. And, ability to interact with the presenter and the content of that presentation. We could also have the potential, what some of the other communities and townships around us have done, is when they've done that, is invited others to come in. So we could have others from around the area to come in. And there's one I'm a little intrigued by. It's called Getting the Development You Want, and its description says, good development is achieved when a municipality plans for it and then adopts codes and a development review process to implement the plan. In this workshop, participants will learn how the master plan and zoning ordinance inform the development review process, how a community can balance the needs of all actors, and best practices for a productive development review process. Sounds more about application as opposed to, content of master plan and zoning ordinance and all that stuff. So, something that we might, I can get some more information a little bit. They have a bunch of other training programs, so if there's something specifically you're interested in, we can look in that too as well. But I just want to kind of throw those out for you. You don't have to do anything today, just, think about it. We thought bringing something here, the one I just described to you is an hour and a half presentation, so that could be something that would fit. I'm kind of thinking our study sessions, we really want to kind of limit to about 2 hours max on these types of things. It's a lot to take in, so.
How about directing new housing in Garfield Charter Township?
What's that?
Where you got it?
In the May-June zoning reform stories. Directing new housing in Garfield Charter
Oh.
Township.
Oh, did they reference when we did that zoning?
Yeah.
Oh, those were stories from last year. That was where they interviewed Steve and myself.
I really like the idea of having 2 or 3 other townships. I mean, the municipal ones, maybe Long Lake, East Bay, Blair, Garfield, inviting those planning commissioners, so we're all kind of hearing the same. People are
Training,
very
yep.
much in their own camps. Maybe the city would be nice to bring in, to have kind of that kind of conversation level. If it's, I don't want 4 hours of it, but an hour and a half might be,
Right,
kind of interesting to do.
And I can reach out to the planning directors there and see if they want to join in, and maybe we can come to an agreed program. Like I said, they have a lot of different ones. And it's nice, I feel it's helpful for you to hear from a different planner. So, MAP has a lot of qualified planners that do these presentations. As part of the cost, we cover their transportation and overnight and all that stuff. But they come in, and it's just helpful to hear a different voice a little bit,
Right.
of somebody else in Michigan that, may be able to kind of get different perspective on some of these things.
And it doesn't have to be part of our study session. It can be, if we have a big crowd, it can be an hour and a half meeting. You can come if you want, kind of.
Okay, yeah.
Sounds good.
Okay. Well, I just want to throw that, you don't need to do anything, just thinking about it. And definitely, let us know if you're interested, because I don't know if you got this brochure, but MAP had this go out recently. on workshops and everything. So if there's anything you ever see from them, let us know. We usually rely on them because we know they're a good source of information. There are others out there, like sometimes they hear from MSU Extension or Michigan Township Association, but this is usually some really, well-done programs that they've been doing for a long time, so we usually like to work with them. But certainly, please let us know. Like I said, the Township Board has provided a education budget to this planning commission and encouraging you to, get education if you're interested. There's also another program out there, you may have heard, the Citizen Planner, that's done through MSU Extension. And that's one, it's involved. You can do it online or potentially sometimes when they come in person. And that's that's, I think, 7 sessions, so like essentially 7 evenings. It's a long program, but it has, it's something if you want something really in-depth out there as well. So just want to let you know about that.
Thank you. Looks like on our agenda for next month, we've got Tower Northwest communication update, Copper Ridge PUD major amendment, and then Ollie's Bargain Outlet will be appearing before us as well. So we're going to have a pretty full agenda, but no public hearings, right?
No scheduled public hearings.
Oh, will that be a public hearing follow-up? Does that mean we'll have a
It's just follow up to the public.
Okay.
Since we have not been directed to write findings of fact yet, it's just
Yeah.
follow up to that meeting.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
But the public hearing itself was closed.
Yeah, it was closed. Yeah.
Still might get some people in their public comment, but yes, it's
Sure.
all, but you don't have a scheduled public hearing
Yeah.
on that
Right.
date.
Mhm.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
Pretty sure you're gonna get the township attorney's opinion about that,
Yeah.
federal preemption.
That's the one that we told them is the most important. I said I want a
that's the
response in
highest
time for the
urgency on that
February 12th. The other ones can kind of wait a little bit. That's the one we want.
No, never tell an attorney that anything can kind of wait.
Well, it was
Right,
the
John?
priority was this one. Tower North application was the priority
Yeah.
one because we
Right.
wanted to,
Highest sense of urgency is what
we
we.
like to move on these things.
Excellent.
at
Well, would
time
anybody like to
Make a
adjourn?
motion, we adjourn.
We're adjourned.
You went way over your schedule today.